Who is Coldhands, the hooded person in black that rescues Sam and Gilly, then leads Bran and co to Bloodraven's cave? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. This video has been co-produced with the wonderful History of Westeros. Do please check out their channel and podcast. There's a link in the description. You might be wondering why this is even a question in the first place. Didn't the HBO show reveal that Coldhands is Benjen Stark? The answer is no, actually, in the books. Before A Dance with Dragons was published, thus well before Benjen stepped in to save Bran and Maura, George R. R. Martin's editor, Anne Growell, was doing what she does, editing. In this case, A Dance with Dragons. Like the rest of us, she's curious about what is coming next, and in one place, when the question of Coldhands is raised, she wrote in the margin, "Is this Benjen?" as you can see here. You'll also notice the very noticeable "no" written in answer by George himself. In terms of quality of evidence, it doesn't get much better than this. Rarely is a theory so directly and certainly disproven. So in the books, Coldhands is definitively not Benjen, which leaves the question, who is he? Let's examine the evidence and make our best guess. Our first clue comes straight away when we first meet Coldhands. He yells, "Brother," to Sam Tarly. Sam only has one actual brother, Dickon, who is far to the south and quite young, so of course he's referring to a fellow black brother of the Night's Watch. He wears the garb to match, all black with the ringmail and boiled leather, typical of a ranger. Coldhands is, or was, a member of the Night's Watch. That said, several of his other features are not typical of a Night's Watch ranger, or a living person. He rides an elk, which by itself would be astonishing enough, but there's more. He is gaunt and pale, his voice rattles in a way that does not seem quite right, and strikingly, he does not breathe. Though he exists beyond the wall in the deepest cold, he does not wear gloves, yet his hands are black. It is from this last detail that he derives his nickname, given to him by Sam and Gilly. Needless to say, at no point does Coldhands tell anyone who he actually is, or even hint at his real name. When asked about his cold, black hands directly, he says simply, "Once the heart has ceased to beat, a man's blood runs down into his extremities, where it thickens and congeals." His voice rattled in his throat, as thin and gaunt as he was. His hands and feet swell up and turn as black as pudding. The rest of him becomes as white as milk. Basically, he's admitting that he's dead, or at least that his heart ceased to beat some time ago, so a dead member of the Night's Watch. There are other evidences for this conclusion. Coldhands feeds Bran and company, but does not eat himself, for example. The dead do not need to eat. There is, incidentally, more than a hint here that the meat Coldhands serves up is the flesh of the Night's Watchman who turned on Lord Commander Mormont. He seems to enjoy getting vengeance on those who betrayed their brothers and, in a very practical way, using them to stop his own charges from starving. Pragmatic, but horrific. And Coldhands also seems unable to pass by barriers that are intended to stop the dead. After rescuing Sam and Gilly and escorting them to the Black Gate, he waits on the other side as he cannot pass. We've been told that the wall doesn't allow the undead to pass, so this is to be expected, but it is noteworthy that even the good undead, or maybe helpful undead if you prefer, also can't pass. The same is true at the Cave of the Three-Eyed Crow, Bloodraven's cave, where Coldhands remains outside even as the whites are swarming towards him. He cannot enter due to a ward of some kind, seemingly similar to the one at the Black Gate. As an aside, perhaps this ward is against the magically animated more generally, rather than the undead specifically. The wall seems to stop communication between direwolves and their bonded owners. Silverwing the dragon seems unable or unwilling to cross over it, and so on. And there are similar defences against magic at Storm's End, hence Melisandre needing to be smuggled inside it by Davos before producing her shadow baby. George R. R. Martin is deliberately vague about his magic systems, so for now we should probably just accept that Coldhands can't pass by the magical barriers of the wall and Bloodraven's cave. The comparison with the others is also striking. Coldhands is described as being thin and gaunt with flesh pale as milk, while the first other we see in the prologue is also tall it was, and gaunt and hard as old bones, with flesh pale as milk. gaunt, with flesh pale as milk. The similarity of description is too close to be a coincidence. However, both the others and the whites they control have startling blue eyes, and Coldhands does not. The undead version of Benjen on the TV show also did not have blue eyes, so Coldhands is like them, but not exactly like them. Undead, but not controlled by the others. Bran and company are right there with us in wanting answers. Exasperated and scared by their trek and the mysterious dead man, Bran simply calls him a monster, and Coldhands' response is a combination of reassuring and terrifying. The ranger looked at Bran as if the rest of them did not exist. "Your monster, Brandon Stark." He doesn't object to being called a monster, yet he's on Bran's side. How long has this been the state of affairs? How old is he? How long has he been beyond the wall? Have we perhaps seen Coldhands in any other era of Westeros? One possibility is that it was he who left the cloak filled with obsidian and the Horn of Winter that Ghost alerted Jon Snow to at the Fist of the First Men. Some theories hold that this was Benjen, and that's possible, but why wouldn't Benjen reveal himself to his fellow brothers? On the other hand, or hands, if you prefer, we can see why Coldhands would want to keep himself hidden unless absolutely necessary. With his voice, his hands, the elk and ravens, he'd probably scare his brothers off, despite apparently being one of them. Or formerly one of them. He calls Sam brother, but doesn't death release one from one's vows? That's a difficult question that we also ponder with regards to Lord Commander Jon Snow when he is killed, and Coldhands may be an interesting test case here. Coldhands clearly doesn't think that his death released him from his vows. Will Jon? Bran and company had a set of questions for Coldhands as well. When they confront him and directly ask who he is, he gives no answer, and similarly gives no response when they demand he remove the scarf covering his face. Perhaps the answers are distracting or horrifying, or both. But when they ask who sent him and who is the three-eyed crow, he does give an answer. "A friend," he says. "Dreamer, wizard, call him what you will. The last Greenseer." Surely this is Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven. Although this does add even more questions, given Coldhands is saying now that he is an undead monster sent by an ancient magic user. Is he acting under his own volition or being controlled? Is this all just Bloodraven again? The Whites are controlled by the others, while Lady Stoneheart and Beric seem to retain their independence. Which is true for Coldhands? Is he in full control of his actions, or is the three-eyed crow controlling him entirely, or in part? Is he being forced into these tasks against his will, like how Bran takes over Hodor, or does Coldhands recognise what he's doing as a continuation of his duty to the Night's Watch, or to all humanity? The truth is that we don't know for sure, although he certainly seems quite independent in his interactions. Whatever the rules of being undead are, Coldhands was a living man once, but who? There are a few more clues to consider, at the very least. When they were forced to kill and eat the elk to again stave off starvation, Coldhands whispers a prayer to the animal in some strange tongue. Perhaps he is speaking the old tongue, which would fit with the idea of praying to nature, but he also speaks the common tongue fluently, and apparently without a strong accent other than a rattle in his throat, which presumably comes from an injury he is covering up. Perhaps the biggest clue, though, is what Leaf says, when Bran exclaims that the Whites will kill Coldhands as he can't make it past the magical barrier into Bloodraven's cave. She says that, no, they killed him long ago. What does Leaf mean by long ago? We learn that she is 200 years old, so presumably to her, long ago is not just a few years. It could be decades or even centuries. However, anything over 100 or more years would have logistical and story problems. While cold preserves, and while Coldhands is unable to hide that he's undead, the decomposition is not particularly advanced. He has all his limbs and can still speak, which implies he still has a tongue. The same applies to his clothing. It's seemingly not rotted at all. Though clothing can be replaced, the implication is that he's still wearing his old Night's Watch uniform. So let's recap what we know. He's dead, and has probably been dead for a long time. Years or decades, though, rather than centuries, because his clothes surely wouldn't last in such reasonable condition for that long. He was a ranger of the Night's Watch, and still considers himself one despite his death, and is also loyal to Bloodraven. He is like the others and the Whites, but different. He speaks the common tongue without an apparent strong accent, as well as possibly the Old Tongue. So where does that leave us? Well, I think we can eliminate a few fan theories relatively quickly. One theory that has been popular for some time is that he is the Night's King. This is a fun possibility, but that legend is from thousands of years ago, which doesn't work well at all given what we said regarding decomposition. Not to mention all records of him were stricken, which makes it unlikely his body was lost or given a burial. Added to which, the Night's King was obviously tied to the others, not working against them as Coldhands is. Two other possibilities are Will and Waymar Royce, who were killed in the prologue. Their deaths were not particularly long ago. It's been perhaps 3 years at most, not exactly long ago by Leaf's estimation. We also saw Waymar Royce rise with blue eyes, and one of his eyes was ruined during his duel with the other. Coldhands has both his eyes, and as we said before, they're not blue either. Not to mention, Waymar had nice fancy gloves, while Coldhands is notably gloveless. I think we can safely rule out Waymar. Will, on the other hand, notably climbs a tree and is then killed, all while not wearing gloves. He's also killed via strangulation, and Coldhands has his lower face and neck covered, implying serious injuries there. And other than being a ranger and not wearing gloves, there's nothing else to suggest he became Coldhands. He's a poacher from around Seaguard, meaning it's highly unlikely he knows prayers in another language, and he's too young to have known Bloodraven when he was Lord Commander. The Bloodraven connection is crucial, I think, because Coldhands clearly is loyal to Bloodraven, and the timing does fit with what we think about when Coldhands was killed. Bloodraven joined the Night's Watch in the year 233 AC, becoming Lord Commander a mere 6 years later, and disappearing north of the Wall in the year 252, nearly 50 years before the events of A Song of Ice and Fire. So a Night's Watchman who was there at the same time as Bloodraven makes a lot of sense, particularly when you consider that Bloodraven brought a small force of loyal soldiers with him, the Raven's Teeth. The Raven's Teeth were at his side when he fought Bittersteel during the First Blackfire Rebellion. When he took aim at Daemon Blackfire and his sons with weirwood arrows, their bows sang alongside his to win the Battle of Redgrass Field. Then they voluntarily went to the wall with him, loyal. Overall, the Raven's Teeth were well-trained and well-armed, used mainly as security, scouts, archers and other battlefield roles. Notably, this is not terribly dissimilar to the duties given to a ranger of the Night's Watch, many of whom are quite good with the bow, like Squire Delbridge, who was a squire to King Jaehaerys II. Given their experience, the Raven's Teeth may have found the climate the toughest adjustment to make, rather than the ranging part. For an archer, it may be a little harder than you might think, though, because the best archers don't use gloves. That means colder hands. When Bloodraven vanished north of the Wall to eventually end up plugged into the Weirwood network, he wasn't on his own. He was on what was referred to as a ranging. It seems pretty obvious that Bloodraven would choose men he trusted the most when he went ranging, and who could he possibly trust more with his life than the men who willingly followed him to the Wall? You can't fake that kind of loyalty, and you can certainly count on it. And given that he trusted his men absolutely in life, it also stands to reason that he would trust them in death as well, or with the life of someone vitally important to all humanity, namely Bran. The realm cannot be safe if Bran is not safe. Bloodraven sent his most trusted ally to get Bran. This is important. It's not just that Coldhands was loyal to Bloodraven. Bloodraven trusted Coldhands completely. It also makes sense that Bloodraven sent Coldhands to help get Sam safely south of the Wall, because Sam was carrying the knowledge of how to kill the others, and very probably the Horn of Winter itself. Unfortunately, the exact mechanism and/or magic that put Coldhands into a state of undeath is going to remain a mystery for now, if not forever. But from what we do know of the man himself, his duties and his association, I think we can now be pretty confident that Coldhands was a member of the Raven's Teeth, perhaps a high-ranking officer, maybe even Bloodraven's second-in-command, who accompanied Bloodraven to the Wall, then north of the Wall, and was killed by Whites, but then brought back by Bloodraven, because he needed someone he could trust to do things away from the cave that he would soon be trapped in. So while we know for sure that Coldhands is not Benjen, his role as an undead being may still be set up for the still missing First Ranger, not to mention Benjen's nephew that just stabbed Lord Commander Jon Snow. Coldhands might tell us a lot about those two crucial characters. Not unlike how Varamir Sixskin's prologue helped us dig deeper into the world of skin changing and the concept of second life, which is surely a big part of Jon's remaining storyline. Coldhands' very existence sets up further plot lines. So in answering who is Coldhands, well, we don't know his name, and I'm not sure George R. R. Martin will ever tell us, because it's what he did and what he symbolises, not who he was, that matters the most of all. And though he remains nameless, and likely sought no glory as his oath demanded, Bran may yet honour his role in helping save the world. When he and his friends first fled Winterfell, they took shelter in a cave where they encountered a man from House Liddle, who gave them food and kept their identities secret. Bran promised to reward the man for his help. Bran is not an ungrateful young man, which gives us confidence that when all is said and done, he will make it known what Coldhands did. Coldhands saved Bran, Meera, Hodor, and, probably only for a little while, Jojen, and Bran knows that. The other people he saved were Sam, Gilly, and the baby as they headed south, so Sam too will be grateful. And given that Sam is the man most likely to set all this down for posterity afterwards, perhaps his gratitude will be reflected on the pages of history, and perhaps Coldhands will get his own epitaph or grave marker. I wonder whether the feel George R. R. Martin is going for here is something like the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, a memoriam in many countries after horrific wars. Coldhands is unnamed by George R. R. Martin deliberately, so perhaps we should accept that as the answer we are supposed to take away. We don't need a name to remember the deeds that Coldhands has done, or to honour the accompanying sacrifice. Coldhands' actions could inspire future generations because he was anonymous, an unknown soldier. Probably one of the Raven's Teeth, yes, but maybe not. He could have been anyone, so anyone could have done what he did. And everyone's heroism should be recognised, even those whose name is forgotten to history. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos, please click on the link appearing now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen now. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.